Okay, so let's start our watercolor techniques. Now, the first thing is you're going to have to open up all the little packages in here. But what I like about is you could use your Crayola watercolors the same way as we use this, but the difference is the pigment and the quality of these watercolors. So for our art, I thought it'd be fun for you to try out what a different brand is like. And don't really worry about if you only have this paintbrush at home. You could try other paintbrushes that you have at home, or if you do, or if you don't, just use this one. It just might take you a little bit longer on things, but because it's a smaller brush, but it's still a really good one to practice the watercolor techniques. And again, you can use any other ones that you could just pick up anywhere basically and have the same thing for the watercolor brushes too. So for this video, I'm going to be using both of these just to help us with the practice and so forth. Now, you'll look at all of these and go, wow, these are just techniques to help you with different ways to do watercolor, a lot of which we can't really go over in the school year. So you don't have to use these in every single painting that you do, but it's just good to kind of know or how to play with watercolor as a medium. Now, the first thing you need is obviously these unwrapped, a paintbrush, and then you need to have some fresh, clean water. So dipping my brush in, I'm just going to make a little bit of a puddle in here on the side of my tray. And then I'm going to grab some blue so I can dip my pigment in here, make it nice and dark. Okay, obviously, like you see, you don't need a lot. And then for a solid wash, you can have your paintbrush or paper at an angle to help it move. But that's how you just spread it down. Now, the more water you have, obviously, the more lighter the pigment's going to be. And a solid wash is when you have, basically, you have a solid color all the way through. It's not really gradiated. And that's how you get that first part. The second part for a graded wash is when you're going to thin the color out by just dipping it in your water. So when I do that, I'm going to go back and get some more pigment on here so it's nice and dark. And what I can do is I'm going to start off by going nice and dark right here, like this, back and forth. I'm going to dip my brush in the cup, and I'm not going to do a lot, and then I'm just going to bring it down. To kind of help you through this, you can hold this at an angle. I'm going to dip my brush again, and you can see how it's getting lighter and lighter and lighter as I go down. And that's more of a gradiated wash. So if you're doing water or you're doing some other things, you go from having your solid wash to a graded wash here. Now, to do a feather in this area here, all I'm going to do for me is I need to put some color down and let it dry. So maybe I want to do a little bit of green, and I'm just going to put some green here, kind of get this nice and dark green-ish, like this. You can go back in, do details. You know, you can always dry your brush if it's just too light on here and put some other pigment on. So I'm going to let that area dry. This next area here for our masking fluid and tape. What this is there's a lot of techniques that artists use in order to hide or not have to worry about certain areas of their paintings that they don't want to blend or bleed or mix. So they use something called a masking fluid. And the masking fluid is basically like tape or rubber. Cement is you put it on here, you paint over it, and then when you're done, you just kind of have it come off. So you can either get something like this at an art store, but I wouldn't invest in this unless this is something that you constantly want to use or you're really into watercolors. Then I'd suggest if there's different things you want to do to try using this. Otherwise, you could just use regular tape at your house and put the tape down and paint around it. But for the purpose here, I'm going to show you at first using this. Okay, so with my masking fluid, you can use anything that you really have to dip in it. You could use the backing of something. Sometimes I like to just use pencil for me, and I'm just going to kind of put down what I want it to be. And you need to let it dry, some of those areas. And I'll let it dry. And I can always go back and clean up some other things that I want. Or if you have some masking tape or other really good sticky tape at home, you can put down different things. I've seen videos where people have put down their tape that they wanted and then use some other objects to help or cut out the intricate shapes that they want. But for here, I just wanted to show you what a couple things could be. So maybe I wanted to have like the letter T or something, but in a fun, artistic way. So I'm letting this area dry and I'm letting this area dry because of the masking fluid. Your way to tell if watercolor is still wet is you don't want to use the tips of your fingers because you have oil on your fingers. So you use the back of your fingers, and you know it's still wet if it feels cool. So if it feels a little bit cool, then it's still a little damp, and I'll come back to that in a little bit. So we'll move on to this area here. Using salt, and salt is a really fun technique, is we are going to apply the salt when our paper is wet. So the first thing, choose any color that you want. You can mix it on here. You can just put some color down here like this. Maybe I want to have color on the side. You can blend colors, mix colors, everything that you want for the colors that you want on this side. And always kind of go over things. Like this. And the goal is you always want to make sure that your paper or the paint that you're using is wet. So what I'm going to do is grab a little bit of normal table salt, so you can get your little shaker, and you really don't need a lot. If you use one of these, it's just simply a tiny, tiny bit. And I usually just pinch a little bit and you sprinkle it on the areas that are wet that you want to have a cool texture. What the salt does is it soaks up the color and it will leave those areas blank and white. Now you don't remove the salt until it's completely dry. The next fun technique that you can do is using plastic wrap. So plastic wrap is something that you can grab from in your kitchen. It's basically this really clingy wrap, and you don't need a lot. I mean, this little square here is very tiny to work with anyways. It could be anything plasticky anyways too. And the same thing as the salt is you want to have this area, the paint, wet in order to use it. So let's kind of put on the side here this really nice bright blue. Get my brush. Have my different blues on here. Get it nice and wet. And then what you do is you take your saran wrap, and it could be just a thin slice or a section. I just folded mine because I made such a big piece. And you place it on top, and you can kind of squish it the way you want. And you just leave it, let it dry. That's all you need to do, is just leave it there to let it dry. And it's going to give it some really nice, great texture. The next area is our Cran Resist. So on the Cran Resist here, you can use an oil pastel, you can use our regular crayon, anything that you have at home that's oilier. So using one of my, I have a oil pastel next to me, but crayons do the same thing. Say you were doing different things that you had little bubbles that you wanted. So I'm just drawing some circles and bubbles. You can draw your initials, anything else that you'd like. Okay. It's a similar idea as the masking fluid and the tape, and that's why we do that. The nice part is you don't have to wait for this to dry. So for the Crayon Resist, what you do is I'm going to grab my colors, make it nice and wet in here. And here I'll use my other brush. And then, that's a dry brush right there. As you paint over it, you can see how it starts to come out. Okay. See those pretty bubbles? Anywhere that I had it, it's going to resist it. It doesn't want to show up. And that's exactly what the masking fluid and the tape will do too. But this is just a little bit more clear. Okay. To give you that idea. The next thing that we're going to do is a very popular technique. So you always will hear about solid washes, graded washes, wet on wet, and dry brush techniques. These are the ones that you commonly hear in watercolor. A wet on wet technique is you want to make sure your brush is nice and clean, and you can wipe it off on a paper towel. And what you do is you get your brush wet and you put water down on the paper first. And then you go back and you grab whatever paint color you're wanting to take. So maybe I want to take some of this green, and then you just basically watch it explode on here, which is fun. And this is great for adding texture, for blending in different ways. It's really nice. Now the thing is the more water you use, the lighter your watercolors are going to dry. The less water you use, the darker your watercolor colors are going to dry. So I'm going to take my next color for my wet and wet. Instead of putting water first, I'm going to put the paint down first. Okay, I'm kind of doing a graded in its own way. And then I'm going to grab a different color. So maybe I want to have a bright color pop on it. And this is where you can paint and mix and do some other things inside of that color. The nice part about that is it won't escape out. It should stay within the color that you chose. So that's working wet on wet. It helps automatically blend it for you. That's where you can make a lighter green, darker green, do your different shades. And it does that same wet on wet technique, but it does all these blooms, as you can see in here, and give it that sort of soft look versus a more of a solid look that you see here. Now as this is drying, I'm going to go back up to our feather because I believe, yep, touching it, it's not cool anymore. And then our masking fluid is just about there as well. It's nice and shiny, so it looks like that's ready too. So with the feather, even using your tiny brush is really great. What you want to do is have your brush nice and wet, and say I wanted to draw in some grass lines in here. You can see that I'm moving the paint. So the paint area that is dry isn't going to move. But if I want to remove some paint or give a feathering in some areas and some texture, I'm able to do so using a wet brush only. And that gives it that really nice texture. say you wanted to add a moon in. I know this is green, but if you draw a circle, you can get a circle. And I just rinse my brush, and I can go back and I can clean it up even more by pulling off more paint, which is really nice. Another great technique is if you have too much paint on here, your brush can soak it up for you. And then I just put it on whatever I have of the paper towel next to me. And you're able to even then do some really cool designs and things in there too, but you have to wait for it to dry a little bit more for if you have puddles anywhere. So if you ever put too much in an area, you're always able to pull it back off using that feathering technique. So just some food for thought there too. Now a dry brush, as you saw, I'm going to rinse my brush, is when your brush is dry. So it's we call it the thirsty brush. And then you go and you grab your paint, and this is where you end up with, just touching anything. You have this really dry brush technique. And dry brush is where you could go in and you can add some hair. You can do those really fine details on some of your areas. It just gives you all that really neat texture that you might be looking for. Especially hair and other fun things. And it also helps so when you put colors next to each other, I don't know why I keep doing blue and orange, probably because I was doing some other colors, is they don't really blend and, do other things over each other, which is nice. But again, if, for instance, you chose later that you wanted to move it, you can always re-wet things, as you see. Now, scrumbling, just like we had practiced scrumbling on our, let's see, it was our snow day that we had done before, is when you scrumble, it's any which way, however you want to draw or paint. And see, if I used a marker that's not permanent marker, so you can see that any marker will move with water if it's a washable marker. You can grab any colors. Just kind of play with what you have in your paint palette. See what you like or enjoy. You can mix colors on the side here. Just make sure you rinse your brush. All your different water ones. So scrumbling is just, there's no way or rhyme or reason. You're just kind of painting as you go. You have it watery, dry, you name it. It's more of just a organic kind of way. Now the wipeout is really fun. Wipeout is when, say you have a color and you put it on your paper. I'm just mixing some colors on it. And I wanted to add some clouds. What you can do is a paper towel or even a tissue. You go in while it's wet and you just kind of dab. And that's how you make your clouds. You can add some really cool texture that way too, making watery texture or just your clouds. So if you ever remove too much, again, you could just get your paint brush wet and you can re-blend in some of those areas. So that's called Wipeout. And then we have our splatter and our straw, which is quite fun too. And the splatter we've done this in the past before too, is using, let's see, what color haven't I quite used here, is you get your paintbrush wet and then you could just splatter the paint by tapping it. So there's the splatter, and that's a really fun one. You could also do drips, where you have a nice wet area like this. And then if you have a straw at home, or even if you don't have a straw and you just have the ability to blow, which you can, but for the purposes I wanted to show you here, just blow in the straw and blow how you want it to move. And it's fun to have things just drip and blow the way, or move around the paper that you might want to have move. You can always just angle it and blow how you want. It's just fun. So something different with all of that. You can even drip by moving your paper, but again, you have really nice paper on here, and so it's, you know, not as easy to move around as ones that we've done in school, but you can always drip things or move things with your brush directions that you want to, which is nice if you're doing trees or other branches and various things. So there's that. And lastly, the masking fluid or the tape area, using some colors I already have on here. It just covers over it, okay? As you can see, it doesn't let it go through, which is nice. And then on this side, you know, you can paint around it. And then once it's all dry, you just peel it off and you can go back and fix whatever it is that you wanted to, if it seeped under or whatnot. Now for, you know, I'm testing, I can feel that this area is nice and dry, but here's still wet and here's still wet. But once you're done with this and you let it dry completely, then you rub off the salt, and once the plastic wrap is all nice and dry too, then you can peel that off. But I can show you a lot of this is already dry here. You get some really unique techniques. So I hope that as you're playing with this, you learn some new things with your watercolors, as well as mixing in your palette, and that for Wednesday, I just want you to play with this. So take a few days, play with these, even do on another paper something that you've played with.